Little brother took little sister by the hand and said, "Since the day that our mother died, we haven't had a moment of peace. Our stepmother beats us every day, and when we try to talk to her, she just gives us a swift kick and drives us off. All we get to eat are crusts of hard bread. Even the dog under the table is better off than we are. At least he gets an occasional tidbit. Our mother would be turning over in her grave if she knew what was happening. It's time for us to leave home and seek our fortune out in the world." The two walked all day long across meadows and fields and over rocks. When it began to rain, little sister said, "God is weeping right along with our hearts." When night fell, they reached the edge of a forest, and they were so worn down by their hunger, their misery, and by the long journey that they just managed to crawl into the hollow of a tree, where they fell fast asleep. When they awoke the next morning, the sun was already high in the sky and shining directly into the hollow tree. Little brother said, "Sister, I'm really thirsty. If I could just find a brook around here, I'd go get a drink. I think that I heard one somewhere around here." Brother got up, took sister's hand, and they started looking for a brook. Now the evil stepmother, as it turns out, was really a witch, and when she saw that the children had decided to leave home, she followed them in secret, sneaking along behind them the way that witches do. And then she cast a spell on all the streams in the forest. When the two children found a little brook with water that sparkled as it leaped over the stones, brother wanted to kneel down and get a drink. But sister heard the words spoken by the brook. "He who drinks from me will turn into a tiger. He who drinks from me will turn into a tiger." Sister cried out, "Brother, I'm begging you, don't take a drink. If you do, you'll turn into a ferocious animal, and then you'll tear me to pieces." Brother was really thirsty, but he didn't take a drink. He said to her, "All right, I'll wait until we get to the next brook." When they came to the next stream, sister could hear the words it was chanting. "He who drinks from me will turn into a wolf. He who drinks from me will turn into a wolf." Sister cried out, "Brother, I'm begging you, don't take a drink, because if you do, you'll turn into a wolf and eat me up." Little brother promised not to take a drink and said, "I'll just wait until the next brook. But then I'm going to have a drink no matter what you say. I'm really thirsty and I just can't wait any longer." When they got to the next brook, sister heard the stream babbling as it flowed. "He who drinks from me will become a deer. He who drinks from me will become a deer." Sister said, "Oh dear brother, I'm begging you, don't drink or you'll turn into a deer and then run away from me." But brother had already knelt down and bent over and taken a drink from the stream. As soon as a few drops touched his lips, he was lying on the ground in the form of a fawn. Sister started crying when she saw the poor brother had been bewitched, and the fawn at her side wept as well. Finally the girl said, "Stop crying, dear fawn, don't worry. I won't ever leave you." She undid her golden garter and tied it around the fawn's neck, and then gathered reeds and braided them into a soft rope. The rope was fastened to the garter, and with it she led the fawn deeper and deeper into the forest. When they had traveled for a long, long time, they finally reached a little hut, and the girl peered inside. Since it looked empty, she thought, "We can stop here and set up housekeeping." She gathered leaves and moss to make up a soft bed for the fawn. Every morning she got up and went into the woods to collect roots, berries, and nuts. For the fawn she found tender grass, which he ate right out of her hand. He was always in high spirits and frolicked merrily around. In the evening, when sister grew tired, and after she had said her prayers, she would rest her head on the fawn's back that became her pillow, and she fell into a peaceful sleep. Brother had only had his human shape, they would have a glorious life out there. The two had been living in the woods on their own for quite some time when it happened that the king in that land decided to hold a great hunt. The forest rang out with the sounds of horns and barking of dogs, and the hearty cries of hunters. The fawn heard the sounds and longed to be part of the chase. He said to sister, "Please let me go out and join the hunt. I just can't contain myself any longer." He pleaded with her until she finally gave in. "But you have to come back by nightfall," she said. "I must keep the door locked against the violent hunters. Knock on the door and say, 'Dear little sister, let me in,' that way I'll know who it is. I can't open up unless I hear those words." The fawn darted out into the woods and was so glad to be out in the open that he leaped for joy. The king and his huntsmen saw the beautiful beast and gave chase, but they couldn't catch him, and whenever they thought they were about to capture him, he bounded into a thicket and disappeared. When it started getting dark, he ran back to the little house, knocked at the door, and said, "Dear little sister, let me in." When the door opened, he raced inside, and then slept soundly on his bed all night long. The next morning the hunt began anew, and when the fawn heard the horns and the halloos of the hunter, he couldn't sit still and said, "Open the door, sister, I just have to go out there." Sister opened the door for him, but she reminded him, "You have to return by nightfall, and don't forget the words I told you to say." When the king and his huntsmen caught sight of the fawn with the golden collar again, they chased after him, but he was far too nimble and speedy for them. He outran them all day long, but at last the huntsmen managed to surround him. One of them wounded him slightly on the foot so that he started limping and had to run more slowly. One of the hunters followed him back to the house and heard him saying, "Dear little sister, let me in." He watched the door open for him and then closed. The hunter took note of everything that happened and went to the king to tell him what he had heard and seen, and the king said, "We shall hunt again tomorrow." Sister was deeply distressed when she saw that her fawn had been wounded, and she washed the blood off and sprinkled the wound with a soothing herb, and said, "Go get some sleep, dear little fawn, so that your leg will heal." The wound was so slight that the fawn was completely restored by morning. When he heard the sounds of the hunt outdoors once again, he said, "I can't contain myself. I have to get back out there. They'll never catch me." Sister began weeping and said, "This time they'll kill you, and then I'll be all by myself in the woods, alone and forsaken. I can't let you go." "If I don't go, I'll die of grief," the fawn answered. "Whenever I hear the sound of the hunting horns, I feel as if I just have to take off." Sister had no choice but to let him go, and she opened the door with a heavy heart. The fawn, back to his old self, bounded out happily into the woods. When the king set eyes on the fawn, he said to the huntsman, "I want you to hunt him all day long, even into the night, but don't let him come to any harm." As soon as the sun began setting, the king said to the huntsman, "Show me the little house in the forest that you found." When the king got to the hut, he knocked on the door and said, "Dear little sister, let me in." The door opened, and the king walked in and discovered the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She was frightened when she saw that it was not her fawn, but a man wearing a golden crown who had entered. The king looked at her tenderly, took her hand, and said, "Will you come to my palace and become my wife?" "Oh yes," she said, "but the fawn must come with me. I won't ever leave him." The king said, "He can stay with you as long as you live. He will get whatever he needs." Just then the fawn leaped into the house, and sister tied the rope to his collar, took the rope in her hand, and led him out of the house into the forest. The king rode with the beautiful woman to his castle, where the wedding was celebrated with a magnificent feast. They ruled as king and queen and lived happily ever after for many years. The fawn received the best treatment and had plenty of room to frolic around in the garden of the palace. Now the wicked stepmother, the woman who had driven the children out of their home into the world, was sure that sister had been torn into bits by a ferocious beast in the forest, and that brother, after turning into a fawn, had been shot by a huntsman. When she discovered that they were both living in peace and prosperity, envy and jealousy began to stir in her heart and gave her no peace. She was constantly trying to figure out how to turn the tide on the two, bringing misfortune on them. Her own daughter, who was ugly as sin, who had only one eye, kept grumbling, "She has all the luck, when I'm really the one who deserves to be queen." "Never mind," the old woman said, calming her down. "When the right time comes, I'll figure out how to make things different." The right time did come, and it was when the queen gave birth to a beautiful little boy, and the king was still out hunting when it happened. The old witch disguised herself as a chambermaid and walked into the room where the queen was resting and said to her, "Your bath is ready. Come quickly before the water gets cold. It will do you a world of good and give you the strength you need." The old witch's daughter was there too, and she and her mother carried the frail queen into the bathroom, put her in the tub, locked the door, and ran away. In the room where she was bathing, they had built a fire. The beautiful young queen would suffocate before long. When that was done, the old woman took the queen's nightcap and put it on her daughter, and she had her take the queen's place in bed. She then gave the girl the face and appearance of the queen, but she couldn't do anything about the missing eye. She just had to lie on the side of her head where the eye was missing so that the king wouldn't notice that anything was wrong. In the evening, when the king returned home and learned that his wife had given birth to a son, he was so overjoyed and was about to go to his dear wife's bedside to see how she had been faring, when the old woman cried out suddenly, "Watch out, don't open the curtains, it's still too early to let light in, and the queen needs her rest." The king withdrew. He had no idea that a false queen was lying in the bed. At midnight, everyone was asleep but the nurse, who was keeping watch beside the cradle in the nursery. Suddenly the door opened, and the real queen walked in. She took the baby out of the cradle, put it to her breast, and gave it milk. Then she plumped up the pillow and put the baby back in the crib. and tucked the little quilt in the corners. She didn't forget the fawn, went right out to the corner where he was sleeping and stroked its back. Then she tiptoed her way out through the door. The next morning the nurse asked the guards if anybody had come into the castle at night. But they said no, we haven't seen a soul. Night after night the queen came, but she never said a word. The nurse saw her, but she didn't dare mention it to anyone. After some time had passed, the queen started talking when she came to visit, saying, "Where's my child? Where's my fawn?" 2 more times, and then I'm gone. The nurse didn't answer, but after she had vanished, she went to the king and told him what had happened. The king said, "Dear God, what can be happening? Tonight I'll stay by my child's side and keep watch." In the evening he went to the nursery, and at midnight the queen appeared and said, "Where's my child? Where's my fawn?" 1 more time, and then I'm gone. The queen took care of the baby as before, and then she disappeared. The king did not dare address her, but he kept watch. Again the following night she once again spoke, "Where's my child? Where's my fawn? After this I'm really gone." The king could not restrain himself. He jumped to his feet and said, "You really are my dear wife?" She replied, "It's true, I am your wife." And with one stroke, by the grace of God, she came back to life. Flushed with good health, she told the king about the terrible things that the wicked witch and her daughter had done to her. The king had the 2 brought to trial, and their sentences were read. The daughter was taken to the woods, where she was torn to bits by wild animals. The witch burned miserably at the stake. After she had burned to ashes, the spell was broken, and brother returned to his human shape. Little sister and little brother lived happily together until the end of their days.